This has been a long time identified issue in conversations with senior persons within intelligence in Canada and police. This is one of their major challenges is Chinese espionage.
Recent headlines have alleged Chinese interference in Canadian elections, namely by backing candidates. What do the reports actually say? How does this all connect to the mysterious police stations that have connections to the CCP? And what about those balloons that were shot down? On this special edition of Return to Reason, I will be joined by a reporter from the Epoch Times as well as the vice president of a nonpartisan think tank as they give us the facts and the common sense analysis. What should Canadians really be paying attention to on this matter?
Today, a special episode of Return to Reason, where knowledge and wisdom intersect.
Well, hello, Noe. It's great to have you on Return to Reason today.
Thanks for having me.
We got a lot to talk on. There's been a couple things in the last week to week and a half that have been coming out regarding our prime minister, regarding potential elections, regarding also the nation of China and being imparted in Canada. Can you just bring us up to speed in terms of, with these leaked documents, what has been going on in the last little bit?
I think it started back in November when Global News broke a story. They had access to official documents about there being a number of federal candidates that were funded by the Chinese Communist Party. And from that point on, there's starting to be requests or inquiries as to what the prime minister knew, what he did about it. So from that point on, there's work that started also in the House of Commons committee, having ministers testifying and to know what they have on the matter. Yes. So this was kind of a big revelation, but it hasn't stopped. It just kept growing and growing. So Global News, Sam Cooper has done some great work. He's talking to several individuals with access to documents or to knowledge about briefings and these kinds of things. And then a little bit later, then the Globe and Mail also started to talk with people releasing secret and top secret CSIS documents. And so it paints a picture of widespread Chinese foreign interference. It has mostly focused on elections, but people know that, the government knows that it's much wider. The spectrum of activities is much broader than just elections.
So, with these allegations, has anything conclusive come to light yet, or where are we in these proceedings in terms of the blame game?
It's hard to say anything conclusive. That's kind of the defense that the government has taken, is that intelligence can be unreliable. These leaks are unconfirmed. There are inaccuracies. But at the end of the day, you have to go back and see exactly what has been revealed and what has said and what's the context. For example, when you're talking about a briefing or a memo to the prime minister or a finished product, it's not just some random pieces of intel that they've picked and it's there's professional people that have looked at it and analyzed it against a massive body of reporting that spans over decades. So you receive a report and you can match it against a picture that you already know, and then if it tracks, then you can pursue it further. So that's kind of my main takeaway, is that what's been revealed is this is assessed intelligence. It's not fluff.
What has our current prime minister been saying regarding all of these allegations over the last couple of months? The first defense he had was to say, I haven't been briefed on money, Chinese money going to 11 candidates. And then his national security and intelligence advisor also said that at committee. And it's something that they've been recycling right now. Even if you ask the Privy Council office right now, which advises the prime minister and top officials, if you ask them about this, that's a line that they will also use.
the national security advisor, Jody Thomas, she already answered that question at committee, and it's literally, we haven't seen the money going, blah, blah, blah. So that's been the main defense. Also, it's been like we haven't been briefed, or so. I think this seems to be established that they have been briefed. Are they just playing on semantics in the sense that, okay, they haven't seen the wire transfer, they haven't seen the exchange of money, they don't have a videotape where they see, a suspected Chinese agent handing out a bag of cash? Are they trying to, play on that word? Whereas, do they have, a number of reports that suggest that this has happened, and it's not conclusive? It's hard to say. So their defense mostly right now is that there's no strong enough evidence. I think the Minister of Foreign Affairs last week also said, when asked why aren't we expelling diplomats, she said, well, if there's evidence, we'll do it, essentially. So it means that they haven't seen anything strong enough. But then her other defense will be to say, well, we don't want to have retaliation, because if we expel their diplomats, they're going to expel ours, and that's going to impact consular cases and that kind of stuff. So that on the foreign affairs angle is kind of two-pronged. So which is it? Is it that there's no evidence, or is it that you don't want to lose retaliation, or is it a mix of both, and then you're trying to walk that fine line, but in the end, you're not taking any kind of diplomatic action other than maybe summoning the ambassador or something like that. So that's been one of the responses. The other, I think most people are aware of it, is the Prime Minister has been pressured enough that he called this press conference where he said he would appoint a special rapporteur. That was in the midst of people calling for a public inquiry. So he doesn't want to go down that road. And the defense for that is to say that, well, we have committees, we have bodies, we're limited in what we can provide the public anyway. So even if you have a public inquiry, it'll be the same. You won't be able to hear, or hear anything new because that's classified. So that's kind of been the posture so far.
So with him saying he'll actually select a special reporter to look into this, can we even trust that process at this point?
I won't be the judge of that, but a lot of people have commented on that. He called it an independent rapporteur. If it's appointed by the government, how independent can it be?
Yes.
So that's the main question. And then is it adding just another step of bureaucratic process to make this this whole issue kind of run out of steam, because he's going to spend a lot of time evaluating the programs and this and that, and maybe in the end he'll make a recommendation that indeed there needs to be a public inquiry, there needs to be a light on this, or he may not.
How much effect could have this actually had on election? When we look about the idea of, you talked about exchanging money, there's been obviously no silver bullet with that, but could this have actually had helped this change the outcome of elections in the past? Like the reality, what could have actually have done?
The government says no. They've had bodies in place, and they say that the foreign interference didn't reach a threshold. So all of them are singing the same tune. CISA's director as well, who's probably seeing the most of the. By far, he's seeing the most intel, and he just said, he hasn't rocked the boat. He said it hasn't impacted. In reality, when you kind of look at it now and you see, certain writings, I think the case of Kenny Chu in BC is one of probably the strongest one, where it's pointing to, a kind of solid disinformation campaign against him that could have swung his seat. And there's other cases too. I think some were discussed at committee last week. Some writings that conservative had and they suddenly lost thousands of votes. So I can't say for sure what was the process that led to that. So does it mean that the government was elected because of it? so far, it doesn't look that way. Could it have swung some writings? Possibly. So that's where we're at right now. And it's not just also the impact on the elections, is after. It's what people need to realize. What happens if you do elect someone who's backed by a foreign state? Like, what is the impact on our politics? Because these people automatically gain access to the Liberal caucus or the Conservative caucus or whichever party. They'll be sitting, inside the closed circle of policymakers, and then they might even be appointed as ministers.
Yeah.
Then they'll see secret information. They'll see state secrets.
Well, Noé, just I'd love to chat with you longer about this. Let our audience know where they can follow what you've been doing. You've been doing some great chasing and reporting on this. How can they follow you?
Epoch Times website, theepochtimes.com, Canadian edition. So I do a bit of reporting on that file. There's a lot of other reporters that cover it too. I'm on Twitter too, N Chartier ET. Some of my work will be there as well.
Awesome. I appreciate your time. We'll definitely do this again soon as the story keeps evolving. So thank you, Noé. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Conservatives want exactly the opposite of closed and controlled. We want open and independent. An open, independent, public inquiry to get to the truth and make sure it never happens again. We need to bring home control of our democracy.
We actually just want to see solutions. We want to see real transparency around what's going on. We want Canadians to know what's going on, and we want to provide a real path towards protecting our democracy.
We are a country of laws, of rules, of evidence, and if we do not get concrete, clear evidence, we will not take action. That's what Canadians expect.
Well, I'm joined with a good friend of mine, David Leis. He's a vice president of Frontier. David, thank you for joining us today.
Good to be here.
Well, it seems like there is more and more scandals that keep surrounding the Liberal Party. It seems like this may be a potential one we're talking about with potential. I'm using the word potential because the Liberal government has been denying a lot of this and saying nothing's conclusive. But Chinese interference, possibly in elections in our country, even to Chinese police stations we're finding out about in our country. I'm going to ask you, first of all, give me a 10,000-foot view as to what is happening right now in regards to the allegations and what has the response been from our government.
Well, those are great questions, David. Quite frankly, this is a historic moment in Canadian history because there's different questions that do need to be answered. Yeah. And they're really, it's a profound moment in history. Why? Because it involves not just simply the Liberal Party of Canada, in this case, where there's key questions that need to be answered about election interference in two elections, but also I would argue this has been a long simmering issue in the background of our country, and that is the larger relationship between the Communist Party of China and Canada. And this is a story that is quite frankly seen in many different countries around the world, particularly in the Western countries, including Canada. And that is, do we have a relationship that is frankly guided by integrity? Is it a relationship that serves Canadians well? And so we really need to get at that. So this is a case study that needs to be addressed. The whole fact is that this type of if the documents are true, and there's every reason to believe that, these are very serious questions that need to be addressed. Whether they're treason, we're not quite sure yet. Wow. But this is a very important issue that leads us to whether, frankly, Canadians can have confidence in our electoral system, yeah, and in this government.
Well, treason is obviously a very strong word and something that should be considered. And I guess my first question I want to dive into, you talked about the relationship between China and Canada. And Justin Trudeau, our prime minister, before him, our previous prime minister was Stephen Harper. The question I'm asking is, has the relationship with China progressed a lot in that transition under the current Liberal government versus how it was under the Harper government? How has that changed or grown?
It's not entirely sure, but we do know that China has long waged for many years efforts to try to um, move into every sector of society. And I've seen this as well from my own experience working with various partners within China. But the whole point is that if we look at the business sector, the transfer of intellectual property to Chinese companies so that they can better manufacture things in China
Yes.
is all part of how they operate. This has been a long time identified issue in conversations with senior persons within intelligence in Canada and police. This is one of their major challenges is Chinese espionage. But it also comes in the form that many Canadians don't realize, and that is that if a company is going to manufacture in China, where there's so many Canadian companies doing manufacturing, they have to engage in a particular type of commercial relationship where the Chinese own 51% and the Canadian entity owns 49%. But as a rule, they do have to transfer their intellectual property. So this says a real a challenge for Canadians because ultimately our standard of living, our economic future for our children are quite frankly based on ultimately intellectual property. So these are very strategic issues that quite frankly need to be examined as a country.
Globe and Mail released an article, I believe it was back in November. Since then, or sorry, Global did. Since then, Globe and Mail has had a couple, and now also CSIS. There's documents that have been come out, and as well as CSIS has been, call it conveniently tweeting around certain times of this has been escalating over the last week or so. What are the current accusations or allegations that are being thrown at the Liberal government regarding China and their potential
Well,
interference?
essentially, the accusations are very serious. And I think we're seeing really the tip of the iceberg. And those accusations revolve around the Communist Party of China really interfering in the last two elections, where you may recall that the Trudeau government got minority numbers in their election. And the accusations are very serious, and that is to funnel illegally major donations to key ridings that allowed the Liberal Party to win those ridings against their conservative counterparts. And in this case, they funneled the money through third-party proxies.
Okay.
And secondly, there was a misinformation campaign, and that misinformation took different forms that clearly would resonate with those particular ridings. So one example was the claim was that there was misinformation spread that if the Conservatives won, that they would deny visas for Chinese students to attend and study at colleges and universities. So you can see how this type of campaign made a significant difference potentially within ridings where the margin of difference was only a few thousand votes at most.
Wow. So propaganda actually could have played a difference with our past elections, you're saying, with election interference.
Yeah, it's really propaganda as well as financial contributions, but this is only part of what we know. So there's the belief that there's actually many more things, and we could speculate about what those are. So in many ways, this is just the tip of the iceberg. And so that's the whole point, is that the electoral system is not owned by any particular party. It's owned by the people of this country. And so it needs to be safeguarded and guarded for its integrity so that all of us can have confidence in any outcome of any election. And you know, I think the government's approach to kind of stonewalling or frankly refusing to really just launch an inquiry raises major questions. What are they afraid of?
David, to be honest, it feels the term election interference, unfortunately, in the last number of years, it almost feels like it's been watered down with the amount of times you've heard it from in the States with different elections. You've seen delays in different states as they're counting and all these things, and election meddling. So it almost feels from conversations I've been having with friends that people, I don't think, grasp what it really means and the potential outcome and how that's dangerous for our country. Do you mind just diving in really briefly about
Mhm.
why should someone care about that potential election interference, and how is that dangerous for us?
Our election system is pretty high functioning within Western democracies. It's a system that a lot of us would have a high degree of confidence in. And that's important. It's important because if Canadians are going to have confidence in the outcome,
Yeah.
you need to know that the system is working as it should. And when a foreign nation um, interferes, not just in a peripheral way through bits of social media and things like that, it's profoundly troublesome.
Yeah.
And I think what's very troublesome is that the Trudeau government clearly knew that this was happening. They were briefed on the matter by
Wow.
intelligence officials, and it appears that they did not do anything about it. In fact, they did not want to proactively deal with it by having a public, accountable, transparent inquiry.
You just mentioned that our government was briefed by CSIS. Are they denying that at all?
Well, the record has been by the prime minister initially
Yeah.
that this was a non-issue, and then the pattern was to deny that in fact they were aware of it, and then later on it was admitted that well there was a briefing of it. So we are getting contradictory stories and messages, and they keep changing. And when that happens, you know a government is frankly on the defensive,
Yes.
and there needs to be some very important reckoning of what the facts are. And I think they owe that to Canadians because, again, our electoral system is not owned by a particular party. It's owned by the Canadian people, and that's what it needs to be safeguarded.
So between, if I'm sure everyone remembers these balloons that were from China that were floating over North America, parts of Canada at different times. You look at these Chinese police stations, which I've at least been made aware of in the last week or so, regarding one in Vancouver, several in southern Ontario, even Quebec and Montreal. You look at candidates being paid or potentially being paid, the influence of Chinese diplomats in our country, um, allegations about the current Liberal government. Is all of this just political semantics and tactics to maybe come against our current government, or is there a connection between all of these?
Well, I think there is a connection among all these things and more in the sense that China is under the Chinese Communist Party, is certainly an emerging superpower. And their
Yes.
aim is expressed in so many public pronouncements as well as plans is to really supplant the U.S. Hegemony or influence of the United States. And I think that Canada is very much caught within that kind of dynamic. And China is very aggressive, very assertive at demonstrating that. China does not approach these things through the idea of having a kinetic or hot war. It's all about doing this through ways that are more subtle and not so subtle behind the scenes. So when you have incursions of surveillance balloons or whatever they were, and there's kind of frankly, initially there was a kind of a denial that these were significant, and then eventually they became shot down by NORAD forces. You have a situation where Canada has to look at many different factors and realize that Canada's relationship with China needs to be examined. I've seen this kind of relationship in every sector of Canadian society, whether it's in the post-secondary realm, where you have all kinds of Chinese researchers gaining information access to, frankly, sensitive information. You have the fact is that many businesses are very tied closely to China. So you have relationships that beg the question, how is this relationship serving Canadians? So this is all very much interrelated.
So just to get this straight, the Liberal government and Justin Trudeau are, at the beginning were basically saying this is not important. They're almost denying in a sense, and now have they accepted that? I guess the question I'm asking is, are they complicit or ignorant in this? And do we know which direction that would be? The current
Well,
government?
in my opinion, I think it's very clear that uh, the prime minister and the leadership are very much aware
Mhm.
of many elements of this influence, but don't want to talk about it. And I think their recent appointment of a so-called intermediary or a third party on their behalf to investigate this is just simply, frankly, unbelievable, because
Yeah.
this is like, it's not a credible third party objective investigation. You need to have an inquiry that is transparent, allows people to get at the real facts, and not just have a proxy for the prime minister investigate himself.
Yes, exactly. Because that right now it seems tough to have his own special reporter to trust the process of that, especially if it's you're being accused of that direction. That is so. In your opinion, what are some likely potential outcomes with where this goes? I'm not asking you to look in a crystal ball and predict the future, but what path likely is this to walk down over the next couple of months?
Well, I think that this could be a very serious confidence issue, not only for this government. As I think many Canadians are increasingly aware. If you
Yeah,
look at a variety of public opinion polls, you see that Canadians are increasingly aware that the relationship with the Communist Party of China is challenged, and that they take a kind of a skeptical view of how China's interests serve Canadian interests, obviously. So I think within that context, our relationship with foreign powers, including the People's Republic of China, specifically the Communist Party, is very much in question. We need to be, frankly, aware of what's going on in terms of the influence in our society across the board, and we need to take a hard look at it.
do you think COVID had a place to raise awareness for what the CCP has been and trying to do? Because COVID brought that a lot to light.
Well, I think that's a very good question. COVID-19 raised the bar in terms of, I think, many Canadians' recognition that the relationship with China has been challenged.
Yeah.
We know that from the very beginning, there were questions about the origins of COVID-19. I think there's many different reports now, and most recently, 2 weeks ago, with the Department of Energy in the United States, confirming that the origins of the virus came from the Wuhan lab. Um, Whether it was deliberate or not is a bit of a debate. And I think China's response to COVID-19 was very telling. They
Hmm.
locked down the province within where the Wuhan lab is based, but they continued to allow international flights. And this, in effect, spread the virus first to Italy and then around the world. And their inability to follow their agreement with the World Health Organization, namely WHO, was a far from stellar moment, where they frankly did not share information about the nature of the virus as they were supposed to, according to that agreement. Every signatory to that agreement needs to share it within hours of learning about a virus that's potentially a challenge. So the conduct of the regime has really been abhorrent, and I think people are finally realizing what's been going on.
Well, this story is going to continue to evolve over the next number of weeks and months. As you said, you used the word historic, and it's definitely precedent setting in our country. And whoever's watching, when you're watching right now, I urge you to continue to follow this story. It's extremely important for Canadian citizens to be aware and to know what's going on. As you mentioned, David, the implications are potentially huge regarding this. How can viewers follow you and what Frontier is doing if you do have more opinions and thoughts on this emerging story?
Well, frankly, I would encourage them to follow us on our website at fccpp.org. And I would think they would need to follow the mainstream media, the larger media networks, because it's interesting. For once, it seems that the mainstream media is actually taking a skeptical approach to this issue. And that's kind of a telling moment. So I think that they should be watching um, all these networks, including yours, on this story.
You said it well. It's a very telling moment. Either the pendulum is swinging or the story is too hot to to deny, in a sense. But thank you, David. Appreciate your time. We'll have to do this again as the story keeps emerging.
My pleasure.
You are an essential part of this series. Support truth, knowledge, and wisdom by sharing this show with a friend. Visit returntoreason.tv. There, you can subscribe to our newsletter by clicking Become an Insider. Get the latest articles, episodes, and exclusive content. It's Return to Reason.